Love to see all the red out there. According to our Riverside Fire Safety Director, Mindy Wilkinson, you didn't know she did that too, did you? There are exactly 250 fire extinguishers in the huge physical plant that is the Riverside Church. That's one next to every single exit, along with directions for how to evacuate the building in case of a fire, which I do not understand because, let's be honest, I don't even read the directions for making oatmeal in the microwave, so I don't think there's much of a chance that were I to be evacuating the building in case of a fire, I would stop to read the directions for how to do that. But I learned that every single one of those fire extinguishers next to every single exit has to be checked once a month to make sure that it's fully functional and ready to be used in case of emergency. I was quizzing Mindy about the details of our fire safety plan this week, and she explained that the fire extinguishers we keep around the building are only to be used for fires the size of trash cans, and that the extinguishing of the bigger fires is best left to the professionals. So I started to ask her, how are we supposed to know what size fire is too big to use the fire extinguisher? But then, hearing her passion for the work, I just made a mental note. To let someone else use the fire extinguisher in case of fire, I will plan on using the exit, which of course I know how to do since I will have by then read the directions. We have so many prominently placed fire extinguishers all over the building that are checked for functionality because there are thousands of people who come in and out of these buildings every day to participate in a wide variety of activities. And if there happens to be a fire that starts in the building, well, we want the fire extinguished. It's the law, for one thing, but it's for the safety and well-being of everyone who goes to nursery school or visits the food pantry or comes to worship in this space, the church. Today's the birthday of the church, as you heard, and by the time we get to the passage we heard from the book of Acts today, it had been 50 days, about 6 weeks, a month and a half, not that much time, just 50 days since Jesus' resurrection. Last week, you remember, Jesus ascended into heaven, gone, but before he left, he told the disciples to go back to Jerusalem and wait, and that's what they did. They went back to the city that was as familiar to them as the back of their hands, and they returned to the temple, the place where they knew they could find God, and they even went back to the upper room. That was the place where their friends hung out. And on the day that this story begins, Jerusalem was filled with people from all over the place. The text says Jews from every nation under heaven. Many of them were there visiting Jerusalem because it was Shavuot, the Jewish festival of weeks, and devout Jews were required by Jewish law to come to Jerusalem to celebrate. But not all of the people in Jerusalem were Jews, because it was also a holiday in the way that holidays bring families and celebrations and travel and obligation into our lives. So lots of worshipers and merchants and visitors joined the regular population of Jerusalem that day. And so the text begins. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place. And suddenly, the overpowering sound of a rushing wind filled the house, slamming doors and flapping shutters and blowing around so hard that they had to cover their ears. They were filled with the Spirit, and everybody started talking in other languages. And all of the people visiting the city, the foreigners providing services, all of them, they suddenly understood the disciples. They understood the gospel story in their own languages, and fire came down and rested on every single person. A flame, the text says. The Spirit arrived and the gospel was proclaimed and a whole crowd of people heard it and it radiated out from that moment. And it was kind of like God showed up and set everything on fire. As it turns out, the nice, comfortable, familiar city of Jerusalem was not the disciples' destination. It was just their starting point. Their understanding of God through tradition and structure as they had always known it was not what their futures held. They might encounter God somewhere outside the temple. And that upper room, filled with familiar faces, even that became something of the past. It couldn't possibly hold all the people who wanted to hear, who had opinions to offer, who had voices to add to the conversation. That day, a wind blew in and the Spirit of God arrived and a fire got started and there was no fire extinguisher to be found anywhere. I have what some people might call an unhealthy interest in cathedrals. Ever since the first time I read Pillars of the Earth, I've been fascinated with their construction and architecture. Lately, I'm more interested in how they run. That's a joke, man. What is with you guys today? Last month, I had the opportunity to pay a visit to an amazing cathedral, St. Paul's Cathedral in London, considered the mother church of the Church of England. Church is done really differently over there than it's done here. What with an £8.3 billion endowment, that's billion, and the Queen, and all the history, and Charles and Diana's wedding, and the formality and politeness of being British, you know. At any rate, the head of the Church of England is also the curate of St. Paul's Cathedral, Archbishop Justin Welby. In 2013, the Archbishop unveiled a bold new justice initiative that put the church smack in the middle of serious conversations about justice. He called it the War on Wonga. It was an initiative to combat one of the largest payday lending companies in Great Britain. Now, payday lending, as you know, is a terrible practice that also takes place in our country. It's a practice of taking advantage of very vulnerable populations of individuals who struggle to earn a living wage and as a result cannot obtain credit when they need it. Their business model is something like this. If you need a small loan just to make it a few days to your next payday, we will gladly lend you the money, no questions asked. We will, however, charge you a little more interest than you'd pay on a conventional loan, with a rate of accrual that's very rapid. I mean, we have to charge higher interest in order to take the risk. And anyway, payday loans are called payday loans because they're meant to be small loans just to take you to your next payday. Sounds reasonable, if slightly distasteful. But when do you stop being a legitimate business and start being out and out criminal? Well, that happens when there's a single mother who's working 2 jobs to make ends meet and she doesn't have enough money this month to pay the babysitter and the rent, but she can't afford to be late on either. So every other option exhausted, she decides to take out a loan for £300 just until she gets paid in 2 weeks. That's a little over $400. Next month, she'll tighten her belt, she tells herself, but right now, there's no other option. So she goes down to the local payday lender, signs some paperwork that she doesn't really understand, and before she knows it, she has made a legal commitment to pay back that £300 at an annual interest rate of 5,853%. You heard me. That means at the end of 1 month of borrowing £300, she will owe that £300 plus a tidy sum of £1,463 in interest. And a year of interest on that £300 adds up to just a little under £18,000. That is over $22,000. $22,000 in interest. And so what happens, her story is the story of so many people who become stuck in this cycle of debt from which you can never escape ever. And the poverty that already held you hostage ruins your life and the lives of your children. And well, Archbishop Welby thought that that was unjust. And by the way, he was right. Some of the most vulnerable people in society being preyed on by an industry that acts obscenely and unjustly with practices that exacerbate some of the most difficult challenges human societies face: homelessness, mental illness, substance abuse, domestic violence. The list goes on and on. Well, that's wrong. The church should both have something to say about that and something to do about that, he thought. So, the Archbishop launched the War on Wonga by convincing nervous commissioners, leaders of the Church of England, the board, to open a credit union to compete against Wonga, right? Banking services, including lending at reasonable rates. And guess what? Their efforts were fairly successful. And 2 years into the experiment, the House of Parliament passed a new law capping interest rates, and Wonga went out of business, bankrupt. It was great. So here was Archbishop Welby having waged a war on Wonga and one good work church, righting some wrongs and speaking up for the vulnerable, but that wasn't the end of the story. Wonga, having gone into bankruptcy, held a loan book, a list of all the people who still held outstanding debts and owed them money. And they'd have to sell that loan book worth £500 million in a fire sale. Hey, what if the Church of England, with their $8 billion endowment, buys the loan book? An intrepid reporter suggests they could get it for a reduced rate, and they could reissue the loans at the original amount. Or they could charge a little bit of interest to cover costs, or they could forgive the loans outright. Just imagine, you're that single mother. You have stopped paying on the loan because there's no way you could ever keep up. So every day, all day long, loan collectors harass you. They garnish your wages and threaten legal action. They have already repossessed your car. You will be evicted soon. You don't know what to do. And then one day you come home from working the late shift, exhausted. You've collected the baby who's already asleep and you can barely keep your eyes open yourself. You grab the mail on the floor next to the mail slot and you quickly open a strange-looking envelope and scan the letter inside. We're writing to inform you that your current loan balance of £45,000 has been forgiven because you are a beloved child of God, and the church that bears God's name is taking this action as a witness to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Be at peace. Can you just imagine how that single mother would feel when the suffocating weight of debt is just lifted off her shoulders? The grace, the freedom, the forgiveness, the life, the actual ushering in of the kingdom of God. And can you imagine what the Church Universal, an institution with a dicey public image, both in England and here and, well, everywhere, would be saying with an action like that that would echo around the world? We take seriously the work of living out the gospel in the world, and we want to challenge people of faith and good conscience to join us in doing good and making justice and putting radical action behind what we say we believe. Can you just imagine how justice would roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream? Can you imagine? Yeah, well, the commissioners of the Church of England couldn't either. They are, after all, the caretakers of the church's future. It's their job to tend that $8 billion pound endowment, to hold it tight for the future church, to make sure that new little Prince Archie has a place to get married when the time comes, and to make sure that there's a fund for a rainy day, and that nice tourists from New York with strange fascinations for cathedrals can come and visit St. Paul's. An idea like this, so unconventional, so unusual, well, it might get out of control. It might just start a fire that can't be controlled, and you know what we do in church when there's a fire, right? That's right. We extinguish it. The church did not buy the loan book. The church did not send that letter to that single mom. The church did not step out of the comfortable and familiar. The church did not imagine what might happen when God's Spirit shows up and sets everything on fire. Now, it's pretty easy for us to stand here on this side of the pond and shake our heads with dismay at what seems obviously like an institution stuck in the past, shackled to old ways of doing things, of people scared of a future they cannot imagine, grasping at the familiar because the fear of losing what they know is too much. At leaders, utterly lacking in any imagination that would propel them to act boldly for the coming of God's kingdom. Yeah, we could hear this story and shake our heads with dismay. Wow, what a lost opportunity. And just about when you and I started to do that, God would blow those doors open and send God's prophets here to this cathedral to start a fire like the Spirit did that day in Jerusalem, because, church, we do all those things too. Instead of the beautiful chaos where the fire of God burns bright hot, our institutional frameworks have hemmed us in so tightly that sometimes we become fire extinguishers instead. Cautious, appropriate, respectable, reasonable, staid, safe, definitely safe. But when the day of Pentecost had come, don't forget, the Spirit of God, well, she started a fire. The Spirit set them all on fire. In fact, she lit a fire in every single person there, a fire that would not allow them to stay in the same cautious, appropriate, respectable, reasonable, staid, or even safe place. No, the fire, it made them wild with the Spirit, on fire to tell the truth, to buck the system, to insist on what's right, to stand up for those who are weak, to live boldly, to risk everything, to light a fire and to not extinguish it, to never extinguish it. Today is Pentecost, the birthday of the church. Today especially, for the love of all that is holy, don't extinguish the fire. Fan those flames. Spread the warmth of God's love. Use the spark of the Spirit to push each other, church, to more and more goodness and grace and love and hope than this world ever imagined they would ever see from the institution that the world thinks spends its time locked away in dusty cathedrals, clinging to a false sense of security and dreaming about a day long past. We can do this because we are claiming with power today, with courage, with fire, the words of the prophet Joel. In the last days it will be, God declares, that I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams, and everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. Did you hear that? God has shown up. The church is on fire. If you can't or won't stand the danger and chaos and power of it all, please proceed to the exit nearest you, because this fire will not be extinguished. It will change you. It will change you, and it will change the world. Amen.